And I'm going to tell you right off the top of the show, this may be one of our last really cold mornings, judging by what I'm seeing in the outlook for the weather. I guess you can credit global warming on all of that, at least on this part of the country, because on the East Coast, once again, they're being buried in snow. In fact, all the way down through Virginia, I believe. In some parts of Virginia, they're seeing anywhere from 8 to 10 inches of wet snow today. They would like a little of that global warming that we've been experiencing. 7 minutes after 8 o'clock, Bill Colley with you this morning, and 27 at our studios. This is Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Some of the things that we're going to be talking about during the course of the program today. Anybody ever have a cell phone drop out? You know, I've had that periodically happen. Well, it may well be, according to some researchers, that is because of all of the heavy surveillance going on of cell phone traffic in this country. Did you know that? Of course, most of our calls don't deal with anything that's too earth-shattering. Still, the argument is, do you need someone looking over your shoulder all of the time? A couple of other things we'll be talking about today as well. One of those is the potential for war. I made a comment the other day. There is a famous statement once made. Winston Churchill was speaking with Neville Chamberlain on the eve of World War II, and Chamberlain said, "But we're not ready for war." And Churchill said something to the effect of, "War doesn't wait until you're ready. It just finds you." We're going to bring up a couple of things a little later in the program as well that I've been reading over the last couple of days following what happened in Washington earlier this week with the Israeli Prime Minister speaking there. What we're really arguing about here is the effort by the United States and some allies to avoid a potential outbreak of war halfway around the world. A lot of people have cold feet about that issue for obvious reasons. And another thing I'd like to mention, at least at the top of the program today, I am fully aware that southern Idaho is really a colony of Utah in many respects when it comes to the Mormon faith. The LDS Church has a long-time footprint in this area and really throughout the Mountain West. In fact, a couple of days ago, yesterday, in fact, and one day last week, I had a chance to chat with some local missionaries who were just working the neighborhood. Two very nice young men, and we had an opportunity to talk about their work. I had told them to drop by the radio stations and actually visit. I don't know if they did that or not, but I explained to them where we were located, and I said that they might get a kind of a chuckle walking around the building, meeting some people, and seeing how the operation actually works. That's not to disparage it in any way, but I told them it might be fun for them to come by. We'll see if they actually take me up on that. But I bring this up because of a story that broke within the last 24 hours, and it comes out of Salt Lake City, and it involves the hierarchy of that church. And a lot of people have been saying for a long time that when we have states that are moving forward and courts recognizing that same-sex marriage is legal, all right, you know what? Leave us out of it. In other words, don't force me to bake a cake. Don't force me to take the photographs. And don't force my church to get involved in sanctioning this if this interferes with our First Amendment right, and that is the five liberties guaranteed in the First Amendment. One of those is your freedom of religion, and that means your conscience when it comes to faith. Long time ago, you may remember that the LDS Church opposed, in fact, campaigned against same-sex marriage in California and managed to overturn it until a court later came back and reinstated it and said this is going to be the way things are. Well, they have come to an agreement. The hierarchy in Salt Lake City has come to an agreement with, and Washington Post has a story here referring to them as gay groups. Just remember, gay is a name that someone developed a long time ago in that Orwellian effort to sell you what's going on. And media now is trying to stay away from words such as homosexual and some other words that weren't, I guess, very nice that have been used in the past. But here is the headline from the Washington Post. LGBT Mormon groups announce compromise anti-discrimination measure in Utah. They have essentially decided to go ahead with add the words, which is the argument we're hearing in Idaho. Add the words in legislation in Utah, but with protections for the faithful, religious faithful. And it's a compromised effort, and the church then will sign off on add the words. It's not called that actually in Utah to my knowledge, but it's the same thing, as long as the church is then not harassed by these people because of decisions it will make in not recognizing the weddings. And according to the writer at the Washington Post, there are already some critics. The Southern Baptist Convention says that he thinks that the LDS Church has been naive in the decision in this process, and that this is only going to lead us down a slippery slope and make things worse, and that eventually, yes, these people will demand that indeed we have to recognize their marriages and that they have to be married in our churches, and that if we don't, we're going to face some sort of legal action. We'll see. Hopefully, though, that will not happen, but this compromise, some people fear, could lead to that. It's 12 minutes after 8 o'clock. We have a caller joining us this morning, and you're on the air on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. This is Top Story with Bill Colley. And what's on your mind?
Good morning, lovely Bill.
Yes, sir.
I just had to say that, Bill. Good morning. Hey, I want to shock you about this thing about gay marriages in the church. And, the Scripture teaches us that many are called, you are chosen. The gate is narrow. And I think over the past 20 years of what people who used to be called themselves quote-unquote Christians have now fallen away because of the fact of the major accountability that God requires of Christians.
Well, calling ourselves Christians in America anymore, as a friend of mine put it, America is now really a post-Christian country.
No.
And we may think that those of us who still go to church represent a majority, but we don't. We have to remember that for most people, Christianity means nothing more than a big orgy of gift giving at Christmas.
Yeah, exactly right. But remember, that when Christ says the gate is narrow, all those who call themselves Christians will not be Christian.
Right. In fact, some churches refer to it as just the elect will pass through.
Right.
Well,
and that's true. But that's true, though.
Here we have,
because God says that. I chose you. You didn't choose me. And so we have to remember that, we're here because God called us.
Well, but a lot of people are also, and I thank you for the call, they're also making these choices on their own. Free will determines, of course, whether we are going to pass through that gate or not. And I thank you for the call. Some people would argue that and say, no, wait a minute. Is it by grace alone, or is it by... There are many, many arguments out there, but we all have some free will. Whether we depending on what your church is, you still have that free will to accept whatever that belief is. I saw something today as well, and I guess it ties in, not quite with this story, but very close. One of my favorite writers, and coming from a Roman Catholic position, one of my favorite writers is a fellow by the name of Dwight Longenecker, who started out as an evangelical pastor, then he became an Anglican priest in England, and then he became a Roman Catholic priest. By the way, he has a wife and a big family. Funny how that works. But he had a piece today. I'll get to my next caller in just a minute. Be patient. It's 8:15 on Top Story. He had a piece today that I was reading, and he was quoting a woman writing for an English newspaper. She went to a training course on sadomasochism. And she's writing about this as if this is a normal thing now in England, and they're teaching people how to do it. And he pointed out, he said, we have gone so far. He said that liberals will tell you, they will argue that human trafficking is wrong, that no means no, and that we have to have stricter regulations on college campuses about rape. But in the same breath, they will turn around and promote sadomasochism and all sorts of what we used to consider perversions. 8:16, you're on the air on Top Story with Bill Colley, 28 at our studios, and what's on your mind today?
Well, regarding you're talking about the LDS Church getting involved in the politics of Utah. I think that it's more of an outreach of the church to separate themselves from being accountable, like you said. But the way I think of it is, it's like Jesus. He's rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's. He's following the laws of the land. But they're still going to be separate as a church in how they define marriage. and it's just protecting them that way. But we always need to remember that we need to reach out to the poor and the downtrodden in the things that we do in life. And this just allows that church to be able to still do that, in my mind, to reach out to the poor and downtrodden, and that's what we need to do in our lives.
They're essentially saying, I don't know that the people who are getting married hitched to are of the same sex are necessarily poor and downtrodden, but sure, the church wants to continue on its mission, but it is separating itself, if you will, from the bigger culture now, the bigger culture which has become entirely distinct from a Christian culture. I would also argue, thank you for the call, but I would also argue this. You cannot separate Utah from the LDS Church. It's impossible. You wouldn't have Utah without the LDS Church. And the folks there made a decision, obviously in the 1800s, that they would be a part of the United States. But in that era, we still had a notion that states had some sovereignty. And you cannot. To me, it is still it is the Mormon kingdom. And what they have done is they have simply acquiesced to these cultural changes and decided that they just couldn't any longer fight it. They've raised the white flag and said, all right, we'll compromise on these issues. We don't believe in it, but we'll compromise. In other words, it acknowledges that you're different, but don't mess with me. But that's the compromise. And they are the first church, these people are the first really major church, I think, other than a lot of the Protestant denominations, many of whom are already the more liberal ones performing these weddings. Presbyterian Church USA in some places. You have the Episcopal Church in some places. They don't even think twice about it. They go ahead and they perform these ceremonies. But I have always said, too, and Ben Carson, is getting some heat today because he said that in an interview with CNN yesterday that it is not how you are born. It is a lifestyle choice. And they have not found, after decoding the human genome, any gene that would say that people are born this way. So I will leave it in the realm of we simply don't know why people are that way. But Carson said yesterday in an interview with CNN, it is a lifestyle choice. He will take a great deal of heat for that, but not from evangelicals and other folks who would necessarily agree with him. They will support him, at least in many of the Republican primaries that are upcoming next year, and he has said that he is going to be a candidate for president. His point, though, that he was trying to make, which will be ignored by establishment media, is this, that the people who claim that they need to be married, who are involved in same-sex relationships, their main argument has been that they would like benefits that married couples get. And he simply says, well, why can't they have a legal contract that outlines that without changing the definition of marriage? Of course, marriage itself is just a word we use. You can't arrest two people who claim they were married. And so, therefore, we might want to ask ourselves exactly what we mean. It's just an issue, if it boils down to nothing else, an issue of semantics. We have a lot to talk about today. I have a guest coming up, I believe about 8:30 this morning. Going to be talking some law enforcement issues with us. I hope you can stick around for that. Bill Colley with you on Top Story, 20 after 8, 29 at our studios. Couple of notes before we move on the program today, and these are important, of course, for me. These are friends of my show, so I tend to try to do well by them. First of all, we've been telling you for several weeks now about Western States Bus Services hiring part-time bus drivers. That is taking place right now. Split shifts. They will do the training, of course, too. 5 days per week, summers off, and scheduled, no school days. If you're looking for a little extra income in the household, $10.75 per hour. You can apply today by contacting 733-8003. Western States Bus Services is an equal opportunity employer. I also wanted to mention very quickly, if you didn't catch it yesterday, we are on Wednesdays going to have a segment where you can actually call in and ask some questions of some medical experts. Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine. And what we'd like you to do is take part in this. And we had an introductory session yesterday with the doctor and the physician's assistant in studio with us. When was the last time that you asked a friend for medical advice? And remember, this is an opportunity to get some medical advice without having to go put down that plastic or open up your wallet or anything else like that. Our good friends at Tripp Family Medicine are going to be live every Wednesday morning during Top Story. We'll discuss issues important to you and give you, the listeners, an opportunity to call in with your questions. Now, we may well discuss next week. We've had an outbreak in California again of some of this drug-resistant bacteria twice now in in a recent period. But we'll touch on all sorts of things, from your issues you may have with your cardiovascular system, or just flu-like symptoms, or even a cold. Over the course of the several weeks, months, and perhaps years, we'll be doing the segment. You can tune in each Wednesday at 8:30 in the morning for Better Health, brought to you by Tripp Family Medicine in Twin Falls, across from the post office on Fillmore Street, because life's too short not to feel good. Hey, speaking of short, this weekend, we're going to have a short day because we are going to be setting the clocks forward for spring, which means you'll be walking around for 2 weeks, constantly tired. That's what happens to me. This whole falling back is easy. That's an extra hour we add that one day, and it's easy. You get up early for work and you go in. But spring ahead leaves me miserable for about 2 weeks, while my body has to adjust to getting up that hour earlier that it would not normally have to deal with. 8:26 on Top Story with Bill Colley, News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 28 at our studios. Well, we will not be opting out of daylight savings time anytime soon in the state of Idaho. From the Associated Press, the Republican legislator who put forward a bill intended to eliminate time changes in Idaho due to daylight saving time says that he'll withdraw the plan because it's against federal law. House majority, now you have some states that do not participate whatsoever. I think Indiana at one time was split into a couple of different jurisdictions where some did and some didn't, and Arizona may have too as well. House Majority Leader Mike Moyle of Star tells the Spokesman Review in a story Wednesday that he'll try again, though, next year. He tells the newspaper that federal law allows states two options: sticking with standard time year-round or changing to daylight saving time in March. I have a friend of mine, he runs a dairy farm, and for years and years and years, he just simply ignored this. He said the cows don't know the difference. So he would understand that if he had a doctor's appointment, he had to shift that perhaps by an hour, or if he had somebody coming by, a milk tester or whatever else, that he would have to shift that in his mind by an hour. But he stayed on simply standard time year-round. And even though everyone else around him changed their schedules, he didn't. And he said it was much easier on his cows. He said it was much easier on him. And he just learned to live with it. And over the years, we've heard all of these arguments why we need to have this extra hour of daylight. But when you're in the Mountain West and we're so close to the Pacific time zone, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, does it? Because it's still dark outside early in the morning right now, and I don't think that we're getting any advantage out of this. And I think it's interesting that he brings this up. Why would people be opposed? Would they be opposed because they feel somehow it will harm us in certain business ventures? For instance, if you had a call center or something, but see, you just shift your employees, wouldn't you? To adjust to what everyone else is doing. If you had a call center and you opened it up dead smack in the middle of Twin Falls, and you had people calling from Massachusetts, you might decide anyway to have a 24-hour service, but you would adjust your office hours, I would think, in that particular situation. So I think you could drop this whole notion of daylight savings time, which may have made sense when it was first adopted for someone who had a long growing season or needed a long day with a lot of sunlight while they were cutting wheat and various other corn in Iowa back in 1890. But I don't know that it means anything at all today with modern equipment and lighting and everything else that we've developed. Coming up on 29 minutes after 8 o'clock, Bill Colley with you on Top Story today on News Radio 1310 KLIX. You can take us anywhere around the world, too, and listen to us online at newsradio1310.com. Also, if you're one of those shy folks who wouldn't like talking on the radio, statistics are that most people who listen to talk radio never actually call a talk radio show. I mean, overwhelmingly, we're talking a percentage of the callers are probably less than 10%. They may be less than 5%. So if you'd like to touch base with me, though, on any of the issues we talk about, you can shoot me an email, bill.colley, that last name Colley, bill.colley at townsquaremedia.com. Plenty more coming up. We're here until 10 o'clock this morning. If we get an opportunity, I want to tell you about that story about the cell phones and the potential that we may be seeing dropouts in our calls because of surveillance. And number two, More and more warnings coming along about a major war in the Middle East that we may not be able to avoid. I was mentioning we have a guest joining us in studio this morning, and I've just got to make sure I have his microphone up. Good morning, Mike.
Morning.
Oh, there you go. So we're working. Sergeant Mike Wendler joining us this morning from Idaho State Police. We were debating whether Keith Thompson was off, maybe doing some hunting or something like that today. But everyone is entitled to a day off now and then. And
absolutely.
So take advantage of it when you can. First of all, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you.
Top story, the name of the program on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 8:34 right now, 28 at our studios. Looking for highs near 60 over the next few days and then well into the 60s by the beginning of next week, maybe near 70, in fact, on Monday and Tuesday. We're getting into that springtime period. One of the reasons you're here today is because that's going to lead into the prom season.
Right.
And here we go again, safety concerns. And it doesn't seem to ever change. A new group of young people have to learn the hard way sometimes.
Yep, exactly. I mean, year after year, I always like to remind people in this season that, these proms is going to come a lot of parties, and with those parties comes the potential for alcohol being introduced there. And so just remind the young people that drinking and driving do not mix in any case. You should wait till you're 21 to drink. And because with that comes a lot of safety concerns. And if you're put into a situation where you're being pressured by other people, or you're not, you're doing something that maybe you don't want to be doing, but you're feeling pressured by friends, just remember that you don't have to be in that situation. You can remove yourself, call another friend that maybe isn't going to pressure you that way. Maybe call and talk to your parents and say, hey, I'm in a bad situation, I don't like it, and you come get me. We had 3 DUI-related crashes just this weekend, and we actually lost somebody in one of those crashes. And so it's still a very prevalent thing that we see every day. And so we just like to remind these kids. I've seen it time and time again where I've gone and talked to a group of high school students and about drinking and driving, and then inevitably in one of those groups, someone will end up getting in a crash, and we end up losing one of those kids that I talked to. So it's not something that could happen to someone else. It happens in this area. And it's always devastating. It's one of the worst things I do as an officer is to go tell someone's parents that their child's not coming back home today.
My own experience, when I remember growing up, I had he was not what I'd call a really close friend, but I'd known him since kindergarten. Mm-hmm. And then about a year after high school, he was involved in an accident, killed, and he had been drinking beforehand. And I still remember because his father knew my dad really well too. And so my dad and I went to the funeral home for the visitation. Mm-hmm. But I can remember just his dad had always been such a rugged, and an upbeat guy. But I remember just how terrible he looked that day when we had to walk in, and then seeing my friend in the casket,
right?
Who I had known since I was 5 years old. It's a real shock. And he had, whether you're 18 or 80, it's a tragedy. But when you're 18 and you have your entire life ahead of you,
yes,
it's a huge loss.
Yeah, it's particularly devastating for these families, and it's a terrible burden on their parents, and I hate to see it every time it happens. And so I just implore the kids, be very safe out there, watch the situations that you're getting into, and when it comes to just general drinking and driving, plan ahead. Don't trust your impaired self to make good decisions. So plan ahead for cabs or a designated driver, or there's so many bars in this area now that offer free or reduced shuttle services, and which is a great program. And so just make plans in advance before you start drinking, and so that you can get home safely. And don't trust yourself to start making those good decisions after you've been drinking. That's very counterintuitive.
I would point out my dad. I remember having a prom date in high school, and my dad drove me to pick up my date and then drove us back from the prom, which that was his way of controlling anything that might get out of hand when it came to. We didn't. I don't think we were abusing alcohol anyway at that point. But that was his. I didn't necessarily like having him do the driving, but it kept us out of trouble. And sometimes parents have to step in and do these things. And you don't really appreciate it maybe for another 10, 15 years afterwards, but it keeps you safe.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the toughest things I've learned as a parent is, you're not their friend all the time. Sometimes, you have to be the parent. You have to step in and make these tough decisions for them, and they're going to kick and scream, and they're not going to like it. And but that's our job is to keep them safe. And so I that's a great job on your dad's part. That's a neat thing to do. So parent involvement is crucial in keeping kids out of these dangerous situations.
He'd been involved in a few of those situations like you, where he had to go inform people, and I think that helped with his decision that particular time. And you're right, your kids may be angry with you for a while, but it's better to have those kids alive 10, 15, 20 years later versus not alive.
Yeah, absolutely.
For people who'd like to perhaps maybe, when you mention you go out and you speak at schools and the like, if they'd like to maybe hear more of that, I mean, what should they contact state police?
Yeah, absolutely. We do safety talks and presentations. There's many great ones out there, and if any of the schools are interested in that or would like to discuss it, they can call our office. The phone number is 324-6000, and just ask to speak to one of the officers there, and we can certainly set them up for that.
Well, Sergeant Mike Wendler, I'd like to thank you for coming by today.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
It's a bit like Wally Pipp got injured and they put in, what was his name, Lou Gehrig? And Wally Pipp never got back into the lineup. You better warn him.
I'll let him know that his job's at risk.
All right, super. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
A few years ago, I was hosting a talk show, and one day I got an email from a fellow by the name of Daniel Pipes, and he said, "Would you like to sign up for my email?" And at first I thought, gee, I mean, this is really cool. I mean, I'm a talk show host in a small town, and here's a guy who is known all over the world because he is described as, you see him on TV a lot, a Middle East expert. And in fact, his father had worked in Washington in government for a couple of presidential administrations. But what he had done is he was just simply going around the country finding talk show hosts to see if they would be willing to subscribe to his daily email, and that allows him to sometimes get on the air when there's a really big subject. So you see there was a madness to his method, or is that the other way around? Yeah, other way around. But I have been reading Middle East Forum ever since then, and he also includes several other writers with what he does. He is, by the way, a Jewish man who is so well respected with his thoughts that he is often invited on Arab television networks. How often does that happen to discuss these issues? And he is on Al Arabiya, I think is the one, and Al Jazeera, and he's even been on Iranian TV offering his thoughts, which wouldn't surprise me, except that the Iranians don't necessarily like his point of view, but they've done it from time to time, and he's been on as a point-counterpoint guest. He has a fellow writer by the name of David P. Goldman, who is writing today, "The World Bows to Iranian Regional Hegemony." It's 8:45. Bill Colley with you this morning, 29 at our studios at News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And you can reach me by email at bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. That last name spelled Colley. And our telephone number 736-0300. So I saw this late last night before I was, just about the time I was getting ready for bed, and I started to read it, and I thought, I've got to mention this today. And he's referencing a big event from earlier this week in Washington. He says the problem with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's address to Congress March 3rd was not the risk of offending Washington, but rather Washington's receding relevance. Chew on that one for a minute. He says Tehran may overplay its hand, meaning the Iranians, but he says, I don't think it will. But they are ancient and crafty, and they know an opportunity when it presents themselves. And his argument is that these people in Iran are simply playing us. And they know they can get away with it because the good old USA isn't the powerful empire that it used to be. The writer goes on to say most of the world wants a deal because the alternative would be war. He says, for 10 years I have argued that war is inevitable, whatever the diplomats do, and that the question is not if, but how and when. President Obama is not British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain selling out to Hitler at Munich in 1938. Rather, he is more comparable to a fellow named Lord Halifax. That is, Halifax, if he had been Prime Minister in 1938, unlike the unfortunate Chamberlain who hoped to buy time for Britain to build warplanes, Halifax liked Hitler, as Obama and his fellow travelers admire Iran. Serious charge there that the President of the United States is doing a deal because he likes these people who have been behind terrorist acts all over the world. This writer, though, says you cannot avoid the fact that they will start a war. And as he says, it may not be today, and it may not be tomorrow, and it may not be next year, but it is going to be soon. I bring it up because we are currently in a position in this country with $20 trillion in official debt, and perhaps as much as George Will wrote a column a couple of years ago where he said if you consider all of the unfunded liabilities, not only at the national level, but at the state level and the local level, that national debt may truly be $130 million or trillion dollars, excuse me. A huge difference between a million and a trillion. Louis Zamperini, who you may remember was an Olympic athlete and then was shot down in World War II and then spent time at a Japanese prison camp, and then after the war joined the Billy Graham Crusade, toured the country. There was a movie and a book about him. In fact, he died less than a year ago, just before the movie came out about his life. Just before he died, he was interviewed about the future of the United States. He was 96 years old. And he said, there is simply no way with the debts that we currently have that we can any longer be a player around the world if a big war comes. And he said, other people know that about us. Think about that for a moment. So the Iranians are pushing us around, and the United States is not in any position to push back. And they are also pushing other people around in the Middle East. According to a story in the Wall Street Journal today, many Arab nations feel that the Obama White House has abandoned them in all of this. I have a story. Like Israel, U.S. Arab allies fear Obama's Iran nuclear deal. And on the second page, there is a quote. A lot of the Gulf countries feel they are being thrown under the bus, said Michel Al-Gergawi, managing director of the Delma Institute in Abu Dhabi and a prominent Emirati political commentator. The Gulf, he says, thought it was in a monogamous relationship with the West, and now it realizes it's being cheated on because the U.S. was in an open relationship. In other words, favoring the Iranians while telling the Arabs something else. And the Iranians are not Arabs. They're a distinct, different group from a genetic perspective, and so there is still some old-time animosity between all of these people. 10 minutes away from 9 o'clock, Bill Colley with you, 29 at our studios, News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com, 736-0300. We have a caller joining us. You're on the air.
Good morning, Bill. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I sure appreciate it. What you said is exactly right, Bill. The United States is the mouse, and these countries in the Middle East are the cat. They're going to bap us around, play with us, and that is absolutely tragic. You know, when I watched Netanyahu the other day give a speech, I watched a recording of it. What I saw was a leader. What I saw was a man with conviction. And then I look at our president, and I see a man that does not know which way to turn. He is so scared to do something to irritate a few people in this country instead of protecting the whole country. I watched Netanyahu and I saw Reagan. I saw a man you can respect. I saw a man that you can look at and say, hey, there's a leader. And we don't have that now in our country, even on the Republican side, and I'm as conservative as they come. The Republicans have absolutely caved into this man. They've absolutely given in to his illegal stuff. The stuff he's doing is against the law, but yet they let him do it. And it's almost like you see these parents, they got some little spoiled brat kid. Well, we don't want to make him mad, so let's let him get away with it one more time. But we're not going to do it again, by God. We're not going to let him do it twice. Well, they're cowards. And that's what our country's full of, Bill.
Well, I thank you for the call. And they're just emulating the man in charge. Because remember what he told the Syrians. He said, if you cross this line, we're coming for you. The Syrians crossed the line, and we never did go for them. Now, we should also point out, the Syrians are fighting ISIS, and they knew they were fighting ISIS before we knew they were fighting ISIS. Maybe we should have actually gotten behind them instead of warning them not to get into the fight. That was a huge mistake on the part of the U.S. government, and that wasn't just the president. That was as well people like John McCain on the other side of the political equation. 8:52 now on our program, 29 at Top Story and News Radio 1310 KLIX, and you're up next on the air.
Good morning. I just want to add to what the previous caller said. The previous caller was 100% correct. I just want to add that Rush Limbaugh says that Netanyahu is everything but Obama is not.
Yes, I'll agree with that. That's for sure.
That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've seen the old photographs of the two men when they were each 22 years old, Obama smoking a joint and Netanyahu in his special forces uniform. What does that tell you? Here's the thing. We have a country, if it was really serious, we'd start paying down that debt or trying to get out from under some of it so we could afford a war. We would have to make some sacrifices, though, and that means a lot of people who continually say, gimme, 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 wouldn't be able to get their gifts, their presents from Santa Claus. We all are going to have to sacrifice in order to do that. Additionally, you've got the Chinese who are making a great many components for our military machines. Good golly, these people are willing to cut our throats, and we don't have any spare parts if they decide they're not going to back us up, which may well happen. And the third part of this, and this is what really worries me, I think that Mr. Obama feels he has to kiss up to certain people in the Middle East and not the Jewish state, because the Jewish population in this country has been rather stable, but it hasn't grown in decades. But the Muslim population has, and we mentioned a story last week that over the course of the last 5 years, there have been far more Muslims who have been allowed to immigrate to the United States than from Mexico or all of Central America combined. We spend most of our time worrying about Latin immigration, but Latin immigration means people are coming here and they're generally Pentecostals or Roman Catholics, so they have some similarities in culture with us. But instead, we've opened the floodgates to bringing Islamic peoples here. And if you get into a shooting war with them overseas, are these people going to be trustworthy within our own country? Because they certainly don't denounce terrorist acts. Oh, you get a little lip service about it, but what they tend to say is, well, yes, it's terrible, somebody got burned alive. However, the United States, they are not necessarily patriotic Americans. Story today from the Daily Caller. How many of them are actually here living amongst us, and if we end up in a war, will they be fighting a front right here in our homeland? The Daily Caller headline, New York schools will observe Islamic holidays. They called no news conference. The mayor in New York couldn't be questioned about it. Instead, he sent out a tweet. That was all. So he can't be questioned by media or anyone else. New York Mayor Bill de Blasio, he's a confirmed Marxist, by the way. I'm sure you know that. Announced Wednesday via Twitter that 2 Islamic holidays will be added to the city's school calendars, fulfilling one of his campaign pledges. New York has a large Muslim population estimated at between 600,000 and 1 million people, and about 10% of New York school children are believed to be from Muslim families. Folks, they could cause a lot of trouble on the streets of America's largest city if they so chose to do that. And yet someone has opened the door and said, come on in. And that person is the President of the United States, Barack Hussein Obama. We have 1,000 families right here in the Twin Falls area living in southern Idaho. Again, they may be very peaceful people, but if we get into a shooting war with some of their co-religionists, are we sure they'll stay with us? You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Hi, Bill. I'm an Iraq war vet, and I will not shop anywhere near Twin Falls. I cannot stand the sight of being near anyone that is in traditional garb, and that's all I've seen when I was up there probably about 2 months ago, and I decided I will not shop there anymore because it's a spit in the face if they have to wear their traditional garb.
Yeah, they do not assimilate or acculturate like other people do very, very quickly. In fact, I thank you for the call. I was driving, left the grocery store the other day, and I was taking some back streets to get home. One of our guests yesterday had mentioned to me a while back that the most dangerous street in all of Idaho happens to be Blue Lakes Boulevard, just because of all of the rear-end accidents and everything that take place. So I don't have to do a lot of driving on it. I'll take the back streets. But you find and look, we've resettled so many of these refugees, but I saw a great many of them out on the streets, and again, in traditional garb. Is it wrong? St. Patrick's Day, I tend to put a green hat on. I know. I mean, I've done it myself. But on the other hand, it's one day a year. And I don't go around with a shillelagh or do any of those things and adhere to any old stereotypes. And yes, we have people who will be demanding as time goes on, as those populations grow. In New York, they're getting the holidays off for their kids. Everybody's kids will now have those holidays off. They'll have to surrender, though, a few Christian or Jewish holidays just so they can get a 180-day school year in. You know that's coming. That's coming up next. Or they'll cancel a few President's Day holidays and go forward and say that, well, these aren't really relevant anymore. And, of course, it's not relevant to these newcomers because they have a different culture. And down the road, those cultures will grow, and as they have in Dearborn, Michigan, they're doing the prayers and waking everybody up for 2 or 3 towns around 5 times a day. And you're just going to see more and more of that, and then they'll start demanding that they have to have their own courts. They're doing it everywhere else. Coming to a country near you. We have 22 months and 2 weeks left of President Obama's second administration. God help us that we can get through this. I've got more coming up, but 9 o'clock news is just ahead from Fox. One more hour of Top Story with Bill Colley. Oh, I've got to mention, too, the Reverend Franklin Graham, who has been criticized for criticizing the president, says, quote, wake up to the very real threat of Islam, unquote. I'll tell you what, I trust Franklin Graham, and especially, of course, his father, far more than I ever would trust any politician. News is next, as I said. More on this subject. Also want to talk to you about cell phones and the government surveillance of your telephone calls that could be knocking you off when you're trying to talk to someone. We were talking in the last hour of the program about the people that your government does not perceive to be enemies. And yet a great many people around the world are trying to grab this government by the collar and shake it and say, hey, wake up. Benjamin Netanyahu was one. We have a handful of people in talk radio who are doing the same. We have some of the old veterans who call the program here. Well, some of them are young veterans who call the program here and say the same thing. And yet the government instead chooses to make you the enemy. Think about that. We had a threat assessment reissued again not long ago. They tried this several years ago when they said that returning veterans would be an issue for the country and would be a security risk. And they put out the Department of Homeland Security, which just got funded again, and it's a redundant, Colonel Alan West says it's a redundant system. He said we already have a Department of Homeland Security. They're running, NORAD and places like that out of Colorado. But this is an organization that was created really to intimidate the American people by a Republican president under the guise that it would be looking to keep us safe from terrorists overseas. But as we were explaining in the last hour, they're allowing more and more people into this country without really knowing what their backgrounds are, who may not be faithful Americans if we ever get into a shooting war with some of the Islamic republics, such as Iran, which we will end up going to war with at some point. Whether you like it or not, it's inevitable. It's going to happen, and those are the warnings coming down. And yet, they choose instead, through Homeland Security, to try and intimidate returning veterans, or through the IRS to intimidate people who go to a Tea Party meeting, or just through law enforcement in general to intimidate people with the Republic of Texas, who would like to see that state restored to its sovereign rights as an independent nation, but who are doing nothing criminal. 8 minutes after 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story 30 at our studios, News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I happened to see this today at a website called Surveillance State. Cell phones, I've titled it. A newly released document indicates that the local reach of the devices may be interfering with cell service too. Well, what's the local reach? These things that are called stingrays. Stingrays are being established by police officers all over the country. Well, the individual officers may not believe in them, but certain people in government have asked police departments to put these things up so that we can better track terrorists' use of cell phones. I don't know that we have a lot of terrorists who are using cell phones in Idaho, Utah, Nevada, Wyoming, Nebraska, Montana, but apparently this is happening in places around the country. They claim at this website that the stingrays are disrupting your cell phone traffic. And here's a quote. Its use has the potential to intermittently disrupt cellular service to a small fraction of Sprint's wireless customers within its immediate vicinity, unquote, wrote FBI Special Agent Michael A. Shemeka. Okay, so you've had dropouts probably on your cell phone now and then, and the technology isn't necessarily fail-safe. But according to this fellow from the FBI, yes, indeed, these stingrays may be making this more common. And so when you're getting that dropout, someone may be listening to you. I don't know about you, but I'm not the guy they need to worry about. There's a guy who right now probably is getting his plans via ISIS or Al-Qaeda, and they've got to be worried about him and not about people like me. And remember, the president also went out of his way to say he is going to issue an executive order to prevent the manufacture of certain ammunition. He said that because he said that we need to ensure safety on our streets. He knows he can't come take your guns away. That would be very, very dangerous. But he does know that if he can stop ammunition, you won't have anything to put into those guns. So otherwise, your only safety with them is to throw them at someone. But I saw this today in the Washington Examiner. Writer is named Paul Bedard. Here's the headline. Police say Obama bullet ban isn't needed. The AR-15 round that is targeted, no pun intended, is not a threat. A top police representative on Tuesday said that there is no history of criminals using a round popular among AR-15 rifle shooters against officers, undermining the Obama White House's argument for banning the light green tip, as it's called. Quote, any ammunition is of concern to police in the wrong hands, but this specific round has historically not posed a law enforcement problem, unquote. That from James Pascoe. He is the executive director of the Washington office of the Fraternal Order of Police, the world's largest organization of sworn law enforcement officers with more than 325,000 members. He added, quote, while this round will penetrate soft body armor, it has not historically posed a threat to law enforcement, unquote. You see, most of the people who actually are using the AR-15 are not your criminals. Your criminals are using whatever, small, usually handguns they can get their pistols and the like they can get their hands on, and usually they've stolen those. The writer says that view not only counters the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms reason for proposing the ban, it also challenges the White House endorsement of the ban. You can reach our program today by giving me a telephone call at 736-0300, or you can drop me an email at bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. It's coming up on 9/13/31 at our studios. We have a caller with us on Top Story. Good morning.
Good morning, sir. How are you doing today?
What's on your mind?
Well, say a quick thing about the ban. It's such a silly point. Pretty much any rifle ammunition will go through the armor that the police wear. I mean, it's you take 22, 250, any size. I mean, 30-06, it'll all go through it. So to select one ammunition is just ridiculous.
Well, then again, if he can select one and see how this works as a test case, then he can go after the rest, right?
Exactly. You're right.
Very, very dangerous man. I thank you much for the telephone call, sir. I've got a couple of other points on that. Speaking of how he has been governing as if he is a king instead of an elected president, elected executive, Andrew Napolitano, you may know him from his past show on the Fox Business Channel, as well as being a regular talking head on the Fox News Channel. He also is a regular columnist at the Washington Times, where he's writing, he says, the president has gone rogue. And he asks if the president can rewrite federal law. Can he alter the meaning of a law? Can he change the effect of a law? He says these are not any longer hypothetical questions. And he mentions the DREAM Act in 2012. You may remember this. The president said by fiat, in other words, as king, I declare it, you will follow, that all of the children who were born here of illegal immigrants are now eligible for free college. May not be completely free, but you understand you're paying for it. And the argument was, well, we need to keep the best and the brightest here. Well, what you're doing is you're encouraging people to come here and drop anchor babies. In 2014, the president signed additional executive orders that essentially made the same offer to about 4.7 million unlawfully present immigrants. FYI, he had said when he signed that order it was not taking place until just a couple of weeks ago, and that further provisions would not take effect until this May. But in the meantime, they allowed 100,000 people into the country and cleared them. So in other words, he may have broken his own edict. Last week, the Federal Communications Commission, the bureaucrats appointed by the president who regulate broadcast radio and television, decreed It has the authority to regulate the internet, even though federal courts have twice ruled it does not. Also last week, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, whose director is appointed by the president, proposed the new regulations on ammunition fired from an AR-15. So there you have it. And then that's page 1. There's page 2. There's even a page 2.5, that is half of a page 3, with Judge Napolitano writing about all of these usurpations. That is a word that was used often by our founding fathers about the King of England. That the King of England was just dictating what we were going to do and we were expected to follow. Well, here you go again. You've got a guy who has come right out and said it. He said it on an interview the other night with Jose Diaz-Balart of MSDNC. He came right out and said, if Congress won't do what I want them to do, I am simply going to bypass them and I am going to run the country this way for the next couple of years. How is that possible? How is that possible? And what he is doing now is he is just trying to establish what his party could not do at the polls. They were rejected in 2010. They were roundly rejected again in 2014. And now, like the devil doesn't care about your opinion. The devil just says, I'm going to go ahead and do it. I thank you for joining us this morning. I have a couple of quick messages I wanted to share with you about some of those fine sponsors of our program. Top Story, it's called, with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX. And newsradio1310.com. Of course, you can hear us anywhere around the world online. Western States Bus Services is hiring part-time bus drivers. They're doing that right now. And they were telling me a few weeks ago when they were in studio with us that these bus drivers also get training, and you'll get paid for that training too as well. You have split shifts. These are 5 days per week. You're driving school bus, of course, in Twin Falls. Summers off, scheduled no school days as well. In other words, if there's a snow day, you don't have to go into work. The pay is $10.75 per hour. You can apply today by contacting 733-8003. Western States Bus Services is an equal opportunity employer. I have a telephone caller joining us. 917 now, 31 at our studios, and you're up next on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Good morning, Bill. It just simply goes back to the same thing that I've said several times, is where's the Republicans? See, this all would not happen if they were doing their job. So they are not doing their job, so this president is rogue. There's just no other way, because we know what he is. And now they're just doing nothing about it.
I read yesterday where Boehner and his fellow traveling rhinos are angry with what is called the Tea Party group in the House because they won't go along to get along. And so they are trying to figure out how they can more work with Democrats. Well, the voters have been changing this crowd out because they don't want that get along, go along. And yet here we have a group of people who simply are part of the problem. And what's the old line the hippies used to use? If you're not part of the solution, you are part of the problem.
Absolutely. All right, Bill. Thank you.
Thank you much for the call, sir. We have a short break on the way for some messages from some of our fine sponsors. But as long as I'm talking about the people who make this program possible, you can join us next Wednesday. We had our first installment yesterday of Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine and had a good conversation with the doctor and the physician's assistant. They'll be joining us on Wednesday mornings at 8:30 from here on out, and they'll be talking about medical issues and also allowing you an opportunity to address some medical issues. Did you know Dr. Tripp, he went to medical school with John Barrasso, the U.S. Senator from Wyoming, who is one of those real stand-up guys in Washington. There are very few. Well, we might try to get Senator Barrasso on the air with us someday, too, to talk some health issues more related to what we see going on with government and the like. But we do want to point out you can join us Wednesdays between 8:30 and 9 o'clock coming forward on our program. And you can actually tune in and talk to the health professionals, get some questions answered you may have about some issues you have in your own life or someone you may know who has an illness and the like, and they'll be able to offer you some good counsel. So we recommend tune in each Wednesday at 8:30 in the morning for Better Health, brought to you by Tripp Family Medicine in Twin Falls, across from the post office on Fillmore Street, because life's too short not to feel good. As I said, in a moment, we'll hear from some of our fine sponsors. More of the show coming up. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story, 31 at our studios. This is News Radio 1310 KLIX, as well as online, newsradio1310.com. Speaking of problems with the president when it comes to illegal aliens, Byron York is asking, did he lie? Oh, and my favorite fast food restaurant says it's no longer going to use chicken that is heavily treated with antibiotics. Details on these stories likely ahead in just a matter of minutes. Do you enjoy sitting down and having a good breakfast? I was always told that was the most important meal of the day. I knew that as a kid when I used to gobble down 4 bowls of cereal in the morning. Albeit, some of that cereal probably wasn't the best for me. And so over the years, I've sort of branched out, and now I eat various different things, just so I can break up the monotony of cold cereal. Sometimes I have a little warm oatmeal, and on weekends, I really like 2 eggs over easy with sausage and toast. Now my mouth's watering. I've got to stop talking about the food per se and get to my point here in a moment. 9:24, Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX. Also online, you can take us anywhere around the world, newsradio1310.com. We have 31 at our studios. This is Top Story. National Review had a piece that caught my attention while I was looking completely at something else this morning, and I saw this headline: commitment to eating 3 meals a day is racist. And racist is in quotes. Yes, it's not anyone at National Review who's calling it that, but they're mentioning another publication. You know this guy David Corn who was started the firestorm with Bill O'Reilly a couple of weeks ago? David Corn is a communist who works at Mother Jones magazine, and Mother Jones herself was a communist. That's not in dispute. You know, when I say that, people say, oh, you're exaggerating. No. The magazine is a communist rag named after a woman who was an avowed communist. So, therefore, that's true. And if you're reading Mother Jones, you're likely a fellow traveler as well. Well, a senior editor at Mother Jones wants you to know that you should stop eating 3 meals a day for reasons, including the fact that it is racist. Who knew? We'll starve those conservatives out, we will. They also don't want you eating a lot of meat, because they say if you eat too much meat, of course, that means the Brazilian rainforest will go away. The writer says, yes, she or her editor actually used the word racist. Here's the quote from the story that's the real sticking point. Dogmatic adherence to mealtimes is anti-science, racist, and might actually be making you sick. That's the subheadline. The writer's name is Kiara Butler, and it went on to say, why you should stop eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Really? Well, how are you going to survive? Her reasoning is here. When the Europeans came over to the United States, they ate 3 meals a day, whereas the Native Americans ate in a less restricted fashion. A practice which Butler claims the Europeans considered to be unrefined. So, basically, if you organize your eating around breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you are perpetuating the racist belief that Native Americans are savage animals. Hello? Now, there were some people living in various tribes who ate 1 massive meal a day, and that was all they ate. Sometimes they might eat 2, or if they were out in the field, they pick a few blueberries and chew those. That's called grazing. In fact, somebody at Cornell University several years ago put out a paper on this called The Grazing Phenomenon. More and more Americans do not eat 3 meals a day. We do something called grazing. Like this morning I had, speaking of cold cereal, I had a bowl of cold cereal at home. Then I came to work, and while I was getting ready for the show, I had an apple. I have a second apple on the desk. I will probably have that when I get off the air, plus some garlic chicken that I made and brought in to heat up in the good old microwave, one of, I should point out, the greatest inventions of Western civilization, and a bowl of salad. I may not eat all of that all at once, and when I get home from work, I may have a sandwich. I may not. That's called the grazing phenomenon. But according to this loon, this woman writing at Mother Jones, if you're sitting down and you are scheduling 3 meals a day, you are a racist, because that's a judgment on the Aboriginal peoples in the United States. I don't like using the word Native American. I was born in North America. I was born in the United States. So I guess that makes me a Native American. We could say indigenous. An Aboriginal is not refined to just one continent in Southeast Asia, or south of Asia, excuse me, that would be a separate continent. We're not talking the people who lived in Australia before the English came. They were not known as Aborigines. That was not the tribal name. That just means aboriginal, the original people who happened to be there. So you got that. So Native American really means anybody who was born in the United States. We've got to ship that term out. But when I read some of these things, it makes you wonder, what in heck are the liberals smoking that makes them come up with these ideas? And to try to say that there is a relationship between being racist and eating 3 meals a day, they don't like being mocked. Have you ever noticed that? And yet they're so easily mocked. If you don't want to be known as a person who engages in self-abuse, then don't engage in self-abuse. And that's, it seems, what they do all the time in lefty land. And then they get angry when we call them out on it because they look so ridiculously funny when they say these things. Another health story I've got to mention quickly. I know that they've been taking a beating lately. McDonald's problem over the course of the last 20 years has been that they have been listening to the lefties. You know, when they stopped using beef tallow in French fries, well, it tasted good. Yes, but it's not good for you. Well, then don't eat there. And then they had to go with salads and apple slices and Happy Meals. My daughter never ate the apple slices. She wanted the McNuggets and she wanted the French fries. For all the criticism of McDonald's, it is still the best place for French fries I have ever found. Even with that change in the recipe forced by liberals. The Wall Street Journal today says McDonald's, though, to try to shore up its image with lefty, is going to curb using chicken that has been raised on antibiotics. At least in the United States. Overseas, it won't be doing it. But that will try, that is another attempt to appease the left. Lord help us. 9:30, Bill Colley with you. Hey, climate science on the way. A little bit about global warming. The East Coast getting buried today in a snowstorm. The folks who cover the news on cable TV are all over this story this morning. A jet has skidded off a runway at LaGuardia Airport in New York. Now, it doesn't look like there are any serious casualties from this. However, the reason that happened is they're getting hit with big, heavy, wet snow. It is snowing heavily from some parts of North Carolina, definitely from southern Virginia, all the way up the East Coast into New England. And, of course, they still have had a lot of cold air there. Now, this is not unusual. You heard a couple of these people over the last few weeks, the talking heads on TV, say that the reason they're seeing so much snow in places like Boston and Philadelphia and Baltimore this winter is because man-made global warming, or climate change as they like to call it now, because they couldn't sell the global warming business. And they're telling you, well, you know, just because it's nasty in the east, it's nice out in the northwest because of man-made climate change. Except that the worst snowstorm I ever saw in less than a 24-hour period happened in March of 1993, actually March 13th and 14th. Started in the late morning at about 11 o'clock on the 13th. I remember living through this because I had to cover it for a radio station. And it started about 11 o'clock in the morning, and it all wrapped up the following morning before 6 a.m., but it left us with about 45 inches of snow, and just all fell at one time. Now, were we seeing that man-made global warming or climate change in 1993? I guess the lefties would say yes. But it does occasionally snow in that part of the country, and it's heavy and wet usually when it snows in March. That very same year, the snow all melted after that big snowstorm in 1993, and we went to the park, and it was 80 degrees one April weekend, which is really hot in that part of the country in April. And then the following weekend, it snowed another 8 inches. So these things happen. I used to live, as I pointed out a couple of days ago on the air, in Syracuse, New York. I worked in radio and television there for many, many years. And twice it has snowed in the last 20 years there on Mother's Day in May, heavily, we should point out. So it does happen in that part of the country. And it has been snowing there probably since long before any human beings ever walked around. Though that part of that question, I think, is answered. There is a lot of discussion going on right now because there's an effort to try and intimidate people who don't buy into all of the global warming alarm. In fact, a congressman from down in, New Mexico, Arizona or New Mexico, actually started writing members of certain universities saying, oh, you're employing climate deniers. You need to get rid of them. So one of those men who's now under attack, Richard Lindzen, has a story today at the Wall Street Journal about what's going on, and he points out this all began because one scientific writer was accused of having ties to corporate America. Well, who funds your research? corporate America often does. It doesn't matter who you are. Walmart wants to know what the weather is going to be this time next year so it knows what to put in its stores and what to expect for its delivery trucks. It's difficult to figure out what the weather is going to be a year from now, but they fund research for those reasons. So some people who don't buy into this climate change hoo-ha also get paid by various corporate people who are looking for climate research. It doesn't mean that, that changes your opinions one way or another. Lefties get money as well. We have a caller with us. It's 9:37 on Top Story with Bill Colley, and you're on News Radio 1310 KLIX. What's up with you?
They say that all this excessive snow in the Northeast was caused by man-made warming. What would they say if it was unusually warm in the Northeast? They would still blame that on man-made global warming.
They have created a belief system that you can't attack by doing that.
Yeah.
Thank you for the call. Look, I lived through one of the worst winter storms in the history of the United States. In 1977, late January, early February, hurricane-force winds came sweeping across the Great Lakes and just clobbered the 8-county area of western New York State. I was a freshman in high school at the time. And just for 2 weeks, we had no school. And wicked winds, temperatures below zero or only in the single digits, day after day after day. 1977. It was a legendary storm. They had to bring C-130s into the airports to deliver food and supplies for the people in that part of the world. And there were people who had to crawl out of second-floor windows to get out of their houses because of the snows. 1977. We had not yet heard of climate change or global warming. Everyone was saying we were going to be going back into an ice age at the time. That nasty weather was followed by the warmest March on record in that part of the country. Hello? These things happen. Climate shifts. It's like watching sands along the seashore. The tide comes in, the tide goes out. Sand gets moved, but it gets moved to another place. So a beach may erode in one spot, but a beach grows in another. We all can observe that, and yet no one's talking about it. But I'm telling you right now, to criticize someone because they got a check from some corporate entity for their research and you don't like the results of their research, people are constantly being funded in academia and science by corporate entities. Government sure as heck doesn't have the money to do it anymore, and then well, do you want your government really going out and taking your tax money so they can put shrimp on treadmills, which is what they do? 940. Media really should be concentrating on that sort of waste and a little less on trying to advocate for this particular position they have, which may not be true. I've got more coming up. Hillary Clinton could be charged with embezzlement. Tell you why in just a few minutes right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. 33 at our studios. Well, she could be the President of the United States come January 20th, 2017, or she could be serving 10 years in a federal penitentiary. Take your pick. Hillary Clinton, former First Lady of the United States, longtime lawyer. In other words, she should know better. And, of course, Secretary of State for at least one term under President Obama. And, of course, in between there, somewhere a U.S. Senator from New York for a very brief period, even though she's not exactly from there. 944, Bill Colley with you on Top Story, 33 at our studios. News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Mrs. Clinton sent out a tweet last night about 11:30, 11:45, saying that she would release all of her emails that are being questioned, which raises the question, why hasn't she already done it? If you didn't know, you had to be living under a rock to miss this story. Of course, a lot of liberals and media are already racing to defend her, saying it's a witch hunt. Yeah, when Sarah Palin was using her own personal email account while governor of Alaska, she was attacked by Lefty. When Hillary Clinton did it in a very sensitive job, such as the State Department, U.S. State Department, then it's considered okay. However, the story has gotten lots of traction, and Mrs. Clinton never had a government email account while she was Secretary of State. She had an account, personal account, she was using for all of her correspondence. The White House knew this. You cannot get Josh Earnest, who's got one of the strangest names for a White House press secretary ever, you cannot get him to admit that anyone at the White House ever raised an eyebrow about this. He's just running as far away from the story as he possibly can. Andrew McCarthy, who's a former federal prosecutor and a writer for National Review, says, did Hillary Clinton violate the federal embezzlement law? Now, he says, we don't know enough about the former Secretary of State's emails to make a judgment about whether they involved classified materials, which could trigger liability under the Espionage Act. Of course, you remember her good friend Sandy Bergler got in trouble some years ago for stealing and destroying documents during the 9/11 investigation, which would have pointed to the Clinton administration as having dropped the ball before those attacks under the Bush administration. Mr. McCarthy says, as I have pointed out before in connection with government leaks, the embezzlement statute may also be relevant. Embezzlement generally refers to theft of money, but the federal statute extends the concept to cover government records and other property as well. Specifically, it makes it a crime punishable by up to 10 years in prison for anyone to embezzle, steal, purloin, or knowingly convert for the use of theft any record or thing of value the United States or any department or agency thereof would possess. So, Mrs. Clinton, by having used her own email account, may have violated several laws, even though people are saying, well, it was she followed the letter of the law. Well, not necessarily according to this writer. How is she going to squeeze out of this one? That's the next question that I think a lot of people are asking. And the Democrats, if you think the Republicans don't have any real standouts, anyone that's head and shoulders above anyone else for 2016, look at the Democrat Party. Holy smokes. They're all 88 years old or more. Joe Biden is in his 70s. They don't have a bench. They don't have any younger people who are available. The closest thing they're trying to tout right now is Martin O'Malley, sometimes known as Martin O'Marxist, the former governor of Maryland, who made such a shambles of his state that for only the second time since the era of Spiro Agnew, Maryland has a Republican governor as his successor. Hello? This is all they've got to show us? All of these people who are getting ready to coronate Hillary Clinton have to be... I think this story, though, will last about a week. You know how this works out. All of her fellow travelers in media, and that's just about everybody, will make a lot of noise about this for a week. And then they'll tell you it's old news and they'll move on because they have to get back to the business of the coronation. And they have to go back to attacking Scott Walker because he didn't finish college. Still made a fortune in life. Bill Gates didn't finish college. He's one of Hillary's best friends, but that's okay. He's a Democrat. And you know, I guess they're not expected to finish college. I guess they're not capable of it. Maybe they're not bright enough, even though they think they're the smartest person in any room. But I'm telling you right now, media will eventually drop this, and then it will be old news. But they'll go back and see if Scott Walker or Rand Paul or Governor Huckabee, if any one of them actually was a bully in high school and spend, barrels and barrels of printer ink on that coming up next year, just to eliminate the competition. That's what that's all about. Coming up on 9:49, speaking of Governor Mike Huckabee, the Huckabee Report is just ahead. Brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls. The telephone number is 736-6563. That is 736-6563. On the other side of Huckabee, I'd like to, at least in the last couple of minutes we have, before this story gets a little old and stale, reference the debate going on right now in Boise about cannabinoid oil. Some folks are saying for a public good, we need to pass a law that would allow people with epileptic children to feed them cannabinoid oil. On the other hand, that would mean some people would get to grow a lot of dope. And we may have the door slightly open, or what is the phrase that they like to use? Letting the camel get its nose under the tent, to eventually marijuana legalization across the board in the state of Idaho. Don't be surprised that that's what this is really all about, and that the people who are backing it, when there are probably all sorts of drugs for treating epilepsy, that the people who are backing this law and claiming it's a public good, that ultimately their real goal in all of this is to find the back door to legalize marijuana. And in their own philosophy, they would believe that that is what they are really looking for, that it is not a harmful drug in the first place. Governor Huckabee up, straight ahead. Thank you very much, Mike Huckabee, Governor Huckabee, Reverend Huckabee, and candidate for President of the United States. Got all that stuff wrapped up in one. 9:54. Bill Colley with you for a couple more minutes this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. NewsRadio1310.com online as well. You can hear us anywhere around the world. And I do want to point out Rush Limbaugh coming up following the Fox newscast at 10 o'clock. Sean Hannity at 1 o'clock and Glenn Beck at 4 o'clock this afternoon. A lot of conservative talk, a lot of libertarian talk with Glenn Beck. He's been moving more and more in that direction. But still, I think it's worthwhile if you would like to sit around all day long and do nothing else but listen to KLIX. It's my type of radio, that's for sure. I just was noticing an email from a friend, and he was sending me a link. Hillary Clinton once said that people in the Bush administration who used private email accounts were lawbreakers and were devious. But I was looking at all of these photographs of Hillary Clinton that have been popping up on TV. Anybody out there ever watch the TV show Deep Space Nine? All right, it might be an inside joke for only those who did. But does Hillary Clinton, does she shop at the same store as the Ferengi bartender when it comes to clothes? Just throw that out there today, and somebody who has seen the show might understand what I'm talking about. I have one last topic that I wanted to get to before we wrapped up today. State AP wire. This is out of Boise. Several parents of epileptic children are asking an Idaho panel to endorse a bill that would decriminalize marijuana oil to limit their children's seizures. I'm sure there are all sorts of drugs for treating seizures for epilepsy. I know it's a nasty thing. I had a brother-in-law who had it, and he ended up dying young at the age of 37. The plan prompted almost 2.5 hours of testimony in the Senate State Affairs Committee Wednesday from more than 20 people. And they're going to be arguing this is a public good, therefore we need to do it. And that always comes back to that. This is a public good. So let's not consider any of the other ancillary things that may happen if we go ahead with this plan. The advocates, though, were countered by opposition from the state's Chief of Police Association, Prosecuting Attorneys Association, and Office of Drug Policy. The chairman of the committee, Kurt McKenzie from Napa, says the committee will consider the changes next week. Brian Taylor, the Canyon County prosecutor, says the bill is too broad. He says acquiring the oil should require a doctor's order and apply only to specific medical conditions. There you have it. You've got an argument going on there, and you know that there are people out there who see this as their opportunity to move us a little closer toward total drug legalization. Just what we need. When you look around and you see what's happening in Colorado, people walking around in a constant daze. I used to buy the libertarian argument that said, if you legalize drugs, you'd only still have a small percentage of people doing drugs. But Colorado's experience is different. Once you actually sanction something by law, they are now finding out it is true. More people will take it up who otherwise would not have done it just because some people don't want to do anything in life that is illegal. They'd like to follow the law. Well, I should say that only up to speed limits. My own experience when I'm driving on the highway and I try to keep it within the speed limit is nobody else is doing it. If you're looking for one law that people have nullified over the years, it's the speed limit. But aside from that, and the fact that everyone has to get everywhere 2 seconds sooner, I think you are opening up a Pandora's box if you go ahead and do this approval. And I know the argument's going to be, but it's for the children. Bill, why are you so hateful? Oh, give me a break. It's about some guy out there who wants to be smoking the ganja 24/7, and he sees this as his opportunity. News is next. Fox at 10 o'clock. Followed by Rush Limbaugh. 3 hours of Rush Limbaugh. He is, of course, to talk radio what Elvis was to music, the king. That's ahead. And God willing and the creek don't rise, I'm back here tomorrow morning. Going to be talking to some folks from rodeo, as well as a group from 4-H. Hope you'll join us.